Good afternoon, Marta, and welcome to Maniphesto's YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Glad
good to
be
have you
here.
on board. Yeah, you are a journalist at Weekend Avisen, and you're also the editor of Rokokoposten, which is a Danish satirical news media, which I've been reading for years and years and really enjoyed. It's kind of like a Danish The Onion, I guess. I don't know if that was a part of your inspiration, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
Very correct.
and we are talking today because you are actually, I think I've hinted at this for you, but you are single-handedly the reason why I, for the first time in about 15 years, have signed a newspaper subscription and subscribed to Weekend Avisen because I was so impressed with your article that you wrote about Jordan Peterson, but then went back and read a couple of other articles as well, and really appreciated the way that you kind of took the reader on a journey through your own journey, I guess, or telling that story. And I felt like, wow, I really kind of didn't just like get a snapshot of Jordan Peterson, what he stood for, but kind of saw the development of thinking that was happening in yourself and of course in him as well. So yeah, we had a little bit of back and forth and decided it'd be good to have a little chat about Jordan Peterson. He's just released a new book, which I have over here, Hinsides Orden in Danish, or Beyond Order. And yeah, we spoke about, maybe just first say, where did you see Jordan Peterson for the first time? What was that got you interested in him?
Well, I actually saw him when he did he did a video where he criticized something that Sam Harris had said. Sam Harris, the debater, neuroscientist, podcaster. Because back in the noughts, the 2000s, I was like a big fan of the late noughts, early tens. I was a big fan of Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, those guys, that whole new atheist movement. And they were doing YouTube videos where they were debating people and being very eloquent and hard hitting, and I really liked that. And I hadn't, and there were some years where I hadn't really been following them, and then suddenly I see, well, Jordan Peterson is criticizing Sam Harris's worldview. He's saying that to Harris, it's enough to sort of science and reason is enough, and to Jordan Peterson, it wasn't enough because you need some sort of moral framework. And at first I sort of, because I'm sort of used to thinking that people who debate Harris and Hitchens and all those, their arguments aren't that good, but I actually thought that, he's on to something. And then I sort of saw, more and more of his videos, and I guess to begin with was kind of fascinated because, he was a sort of I don't know what you call it in English, breath of fresh air, I suppose, like new arguments, because the new atheist debates, they had, I guess when you hear the same debate for years, you get to know the arguments and it becomes less interesting. And here was a guy who was saying something new, and so I followed him, I think from late 2017, a couple of years, and I wrote about him in Weekend Avisen, and then I sort of at the same time I think that he became ill, I stopped following him, and now he's back, and so I'm back to writing about him. And I think perhaps we can talk about that. My view on him has sort of changed and developed, and but I still think he's a very interesting character to follow, and that his fan base and the reactions to him are really, they're very interesting.
Yeah, in some ways he, like that meeting with Sam Harris, I can remember he kind of like came out onto the scene, and then he was suddenly interviewing like all the other big names or talking to them. And I remember, did you hear the first interview he did with Sam Harris, where they kind of got started, and then they were trying to like lay out the framework for what they're going to talk about, and they started talking about what is truth. And then like they just got stuck and they couldn't agree. So they ended up spending I think it was like an hour and a half, and they just couldn't agree, like, what is truth? Like, what does that mean somehow, right?
I remember, I actually remember exactly when I heard, that wasn't the first time. I think the first time I heard him criticizing Harris was actually when he was doing a lecture or teaching a class. So he didn't have like Harris in the room with him or anything. He wasn't particularly well known then. But yeah, I heard that debate, and I remember exactly where I was. I remember standing in like the basement of my apartment building, like doing my laundry, And I remember thinking, oh my God, just get on with it. They were just stuck in this completely, to me, it sounded like a bit of a pointless argument.
Mhm.
But it's like, it was like two different, I hate to use the word discourse, but here it goes. Like two different discourses sort of clashing, because you have like Harris, who's, I suppose, used to arguing against religious people and used to like a certain line of arguments, and then Peterson, who comes at it from like a different angle, because he's not your usual religious person, I suppose. But I mean, I don't know how you see him, because I think, I mean, when it comes to the religious question, I mean, I think he's a bit, well, he's very vague, I think. But I mean, it sounded to me when you were talking about him that, well, that he sort of pointed you in a religious direction, or.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so let's try and place where is Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson,
Yeah.
and what are these things? Because yeah, if we use the word discourses, one could also just say like this, it's almost like they're looking at things from different worlds, right? Like they have different frames of existence. And if the way I see it is, Sam Harris is standing very squarely in a kind of like rational, materialistic worldview, where everything that we can see, touch, kind of get into with our senses, that's reality. And everything else, that's the realm of fantasy or something like that, right? Which can be interesting, but isn't anything that we can base like important decisions on in our lives, maybe. And so, and to be fair, I would actually say Jordan Peterson, has at least one foot very well and firmly planted the same place as well. And then maybe the way I normally say is like, with a toe, he's kind of like testing other grounds as well, but he hasn't like transferred any weight over anything else yet. And I think that's why they can have that conversation, why it's still so interesting, because they're still looking generally. But for me, Jordan Peterson's project is to be kind of like casting out anchors or probes into an understanding of what one could call the world of narrative, the world of myth, the world of archetypes, and also what one called the religious sphere or something like that, right? Which is really, where the entire, science comes from, actually, from the first universities, that theology was the big area of research, right? And so he's kind of, in that way, trying to reconnect, I think, in some ways, a project that's gone off in a certain direction. That's the way I would see it. And I guess that's part of my opinion starting to come through as well there as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I mean, one of the things that he, I suppose, talks about is how, I mean, how we need, certain stories to make sense of our lives, and the history of those stories is probably religious, but a lot of people are not religious, and so the basis of those stories is sort of torn away or removed. But you still have the stories somewhere up here, and you still live your life in a certain way. I mean, Jordan Peterson would say, well, I live as though God exists, right? So if you ask him that, then he'll say, do you believe in God? Well, yes, no, I live as though God exists. And you might think that's a vague, I mean, I think that's a bit of a vague answer, but on the other hand, I get where he's coming from, because you can, I suppose, live your life in a way that you think would be compatible with a type of religion, or imitating Christ or something like that. But at the same time, you don't really believe in it. You don't really, because I mean, there is, I think the thing that kind of irritates me about Peterson's view on religion is that I mean, I guess that most people who are, let's say, Christian, they actually believe in some sense that, yes, God exists, not as a metaphor or as like a philosophical tool, but an actual entity that cares about you and that makes things happen. And many people probably also believe that, yes, that Christ rose on the third day, etc. They actually believe this. They live in a world where that's real. They have like the presence of God in their head all the time. And I assume that's very different from the way that I'm thinking, for example, or that any other non-religious person would think. And it's as though I don't know, it's as though he's trying to approach it from an entirely different way, but he's sort of pretending that type of Christian or religious person doesn't exist. That to him religion is like something completely different from what it is to billions of people around the world.
Well,
So
more I'd say his criticism, or let's first get this straight. So since being introduced to Jordan Peterson, I've converted back to Christianity, and I've actually become an Orthodox Christian. I grew up as a Protestant, and so I am a person who believes that God exists, and I would say, we'll go into what that means, I guess.
Sure.
There'll be lots of time for that. But I think Jordan Peterson's criticism, which I think is a very relevant criticism, is, well, if you say you believe that God exists, then that should influence your actions, because your actions speak louder than what you say, right? And so what I see, if there's an all-powerful God who is the same as described in the Bible, then you should become in a certain way yourself, that that should influence the way you are. And you don't live up to that, especially when you look at the Christian church today. And so is that even possible to live up to that standard really of human conduct? And so I think that's kind of his criticism, is and that came especially clear in this last talk he had with Jonathan Peugeot about 2 weeks ago, where he said, like, I just can't imagine what the consequences would be if one actually believed that. Like it's ungraspable how big that would be, and what the consequences would have to be for one's life and action. So in some way, he's very vague, and it's very frustrating. He has 1,000,001 answers when people ask him if God exists. And then in some ways, I just have a massive respect for his honesty, because he realizes the magnitude of that question, and he's like careful enough to be like, instead of like, other people, maybe myself included, or it's like, oh, I believe in this. Oh, I believe in this, and to be fair, you said, like, well, most people aren't religious. And in my perspective, and I had this perspective before even meeting Jordan Peterson, is like, everybody's religious. We're just religious about different things. And so we've rejected the old religions, but human beings have a natural religious impulse. And so if it's not, Christianity, Buddhism, or whatever, then it becomes, the iPhone, or your football team, or consumption, or whatever, right? We find different gods to worship in our lives. But explaining human beings. I studied political science, and I realized very quickly, like you can't explain what human beings are doing through a rational framework. It just doesn't work. We need other ways of looking at it. And if you look at, there's some people who describe the human as homo adorans, the worshiping being. And that's an interesting way of seeing. Suddenly a lot of things fall into place when you see people acting that way instead, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that that like, you need a narrative, and that doesn't have to be religious. I mean, there's like a quote, what is it? You have to serve somebody, right? And I think that's to some degree true. And I think, I mean, I get that when Peterson says, that you sort of follow, and this is very paraphrasing, that you follow like a story that you don't, you barely know what it is yourself. But I just imagine that being religious is different in the sense that you actually believe that there is something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've never, I don't remember, there being a time where that was, where I was religious in that sense. But I just imagine that I mean, when I speak to people who are very religious, I just have the idea that, that it's like, and maybe, you could say, well, they're just sort of embodying general principles, but I think they feel, I mean, some of them at least, I'm not saying you do or everyone does, but I think, I mean, that to many people, they just believe that there is something, the way that I believe that Australia exists, not to be sort of glib or anything, but, I believe that Australia, if someone asks me, I'd say, yeah, it exists. I've never seen it, but I guess it's there. And so I think, I mean, there is a difference, but I mean, I think perhaps I see Peterson's project as, if you were to sort of draw describe the sort of evolution from where Hitchens and Dawkins where they are. I mean, they were, I suppose, rejecting religion in the form that I guess Peterson would also be rejecting it. Perhaps the hypocrisy and the the
Not
sort
just the
of
hypocrisy, but it's kind of like a very childish understanding of,
mm,
it's the man in the sky with the gray beard kind of thing, right? Which is
yeah.
what I rejected growing up as well. I became an atheist because like it just made no sense, right? It was these fairy tales that people just took completely literally, and where it conflicted with science, Christianity just doubled down some ways, and so there became a bigger and bigger disconnect between science, which we could see worked and created all these great things, and what people were doing in churches. And so as the gap became bigger, if you were a modern person living in a normal society, then it was harder and harder to reconcile these things. And then I think what Jordan Peterson did is he kind of just he opened up a framework for how you could be understanding these stories in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of see it as like a religion without God, or you don't have to have a God. And what I'm wondering is that possible? I mean, I think that's like the big question, because you reject, it's a bit like, I suppose, Kierkegaard. I'm not a big Kierkegaard expert, but he was rejecting the hypocrisy and the ideology and the whole sort of I think the front of the, not the front of the church.
Formalism, I think it's like whole, legalism, formalist, like the kind of structure and framework. It had lost the spirit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the posing and the sort of outward appearance was but I guess Peterson is right that once you've rejected all of that Hitchens and Dawkins did and so on, they sort of assumed, and Harris as well, they never really sort of went on from there, because once you've rejected all that, it's true. I mean, it doesn't follow from that you should behave in a certain way. I mean, and perhaps, Hitchens and Dawkins and these people, they sort of took for granted that, because they had like great stuff going on in their lives or, they seemed to be successful or whatever, they had like a purpose in their life. And, Dawkins with science and nature and so on. And they didn't have any problems with finding a path for themselves. But it's not obvious that it should be that way for everyone. It's not obvious from rejecting God that you then follow a certain path, or that path is necessarily any good. You could do all sorts of things. And so perhaps Peterson is trying to find a way that, a way that you can go with, that you don't believe in God in that sense. But that's what he means with acting as though God exists. I'm just not sure that I don't know if that works. I mean, I guess it does for me, but maybe that's because well, I don't know. I mean, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'd like to hear like what I suppose what religion is to you, or what faith is to you. I mean, because
those are big questions.
Yeah,
I mean, I for me, religion is what brings people together in fellowship. And I think that, so a little bit of background. I grew up in South Africa. I grew up in a very kind of, you could call it a very tribal culture in many ways, especially if I compare it to, kind of a big city cosmopolitan culture like there is in Copenhagen, where, I've lived for most of my adult life. And so when I came to Denmark, then I studied university, and there's this postmodernism is kind of like the perspective that you're presented with, and that you're trained to see the world through that. Especially I studied at Copenhagen University, and it really, you see the lightness of all things somehow, and you see how like you use the word discourses, right? There's just like these flows of information and ideas, and so you kind of get a different perspective on existence somehow. And the relativism of all things, right? And how you can just be whatever you want to be, but that also means, well, then what should I be, right? And you're presented with this challenge of that, you desire things, but when you reach the object of your desire, then you just desire something else. And so that's a wheel that carries on going. And so we've constructed a society around this postmodern idea in some ways. and it feeds our societies. You know, we have an idea of we need growth continuously to keep our, you know, the entire political system running as well. And so you know, so basically consumption is, you know, the solution to a lot of our, you know, to the feeling of emptiness underneath us. But more and more people are realizing, well, that's not enough, you know, that it feels empty. It doesn't give me what I need in my life. And so I think, you know, God is still staying very much unpopular in some ways, but spirituality seems to be really coming back in a big way for many people. And so a lot of people are realizing, well, there's something else. I don't really know what it is. I can't really describe what it is. And I think that's one of the things that Jordan Peterson is doing, is he's just creating a framework about archetypes and, you know, kind of like the narrative structure of existence that helps people to, you know, create a hierarchy again out of after, you know, postmodernism has kind of leveled the entire playing field, and maybe it needed to be leveled, you know, because of you know, it seems like there was a lot of problems with churches, and still is probably as well. But now that's been flattened, and people realize, well, you know, we like cathedrals, they're beautiful. We like to have towers, you know, there can be hierarchy. We need something to be able to see some things are better than others as well, because otherwise, how do I know what to do in my life? How do I create direction? And, you know, so I work with men in Maniphesto, and one of the challenges that every single guy faces, if he's a CEO of a company or if he's, you know, a garbage collector, is like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And what is it that I want to achieve when I, you know, before I die? And how do I, you know, how do I manage that thing? Like it could be almost anything, because society opens up almost any possibility for us. So I think that's at least what we've been getting out of Jordan Peterson is that broad understanding. And it's up to me to understand it. But there's more to existence than just what I can see and feel, or at least if it all becomes about material reality, then it's about, well, how much stuff can I get for myself? And when I do that, then it just, it goes off in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I perhaps take for granted, because I see that, you know, Jordan Peterson obviously has a lot of young fans, of young men, and I can sometimes, you know, look at that and think, well, you know, that's great, but, you know, be careful that you don't become too sort of fanboyish. But then on the other hand, I look at myself when I was in my early 20s, and I was a complete, you know, like Hitchens fangirl. I used to, you know, read his articles and I still, you know, like him a lot. I think very sad that he's not alive anymore. But, you know, obviously I'm not a fangirl in that sense anymore, but that's what I used to be in my early 20s. You know, I remember I had a discussion with a girl in my class when I was studying journalism who was quite religious, and I would just basically like rattle off their arguments, you know, and I thought I was, you know, really great. So I guess I take for granted that, you know, I've found some sort of direction in life, and I sort of know what I'm doing ish, you know, knock on wood is I think the English expression, but yeah, you can't really take that for granted, because, you know, when I was in my early 20s, I was looking for a direction as well, and I was copying other people's arguments, and, you know, who's to say that I'm still not doing that sometimes. So yeah, I think you can definitely underestimate how things that seem obvious to me today, they don't necessarily seem obvious to people in their 20s, and sort of underestimate that yeah, people need to be told very basic things, you know, and also I mean, I've not thought that I sort of needed religion to do the things I do, obviously, but I guess I've needed to, in some sense, be lucky that I found, you know, that I got to do stuff that I liked at the times where I needed to do them. And you're not always that lucky, and when you're not, well, what are you gonna reach for? So yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that well, yeah, that you shouldn't underestimate that people need structure. Just because you have it yourself
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that it's because
But
maybe
it's
you
obvious
just
to
got
everybody
lucky.
else. I mean, when you say lucky, like I also feel like I've been so lucky in my life. I have been very irresponsible. When I was 16 years old, I was riding around on a motorbike 200 kilometers an hour, had some very close calls, never got into really bad danger. But, when I left South Africa, sold my motorbike to my neighbor. 2 weeks later, he drove into a lamppost and died. And that was a bit of a wake-up call, one could think, right? But, I've done just as silly and stupid things in my 20s as well, throughout my life. And also just made terrible decisions as far as, like how to set up my life and people that I've made friends with and what our relationships have been based on and things like that, right? And so, but today I'm sitting here, I have a farm and I have a business and it's going well. And I have a wife and two boys. And so I was like, wow, that's great. And maybe a lot of it's luck. I also think a lot of it is, like I got some good, like a good basic operating system from my parents. Like they loved each other. They treated each other well. I never saw my parents fight. And so there was just some very basic patterns of attention and appreciation in my family that was given to us. And so some of it's that, I think. And then, as you said, like when people are in their, teenage years, 20s, like they need an identity and it's hard to get to the very roots of things, like the depths of things, and it's hard to aim for the highest thing. So, we what we need is we find an icon of something, right? And this is again the religious aspect. We find icons and we fixate on the icon, and then we aim towards that. And so, sure, Jordan Peterson, if you just make him your guru, and I don't think we should use the word guru about him, but like if you just make him your guru, you're gonna go off the line somewhere, right? Because he's not a saint in any manner of means, and he's not even clear about his own standing point. But it's better than what some of the icons and some of the the idols that we have today, like what these people stand for.
I mean, you could do a lot worse, but I mean, but I suppose to go back to Hitchens, like he always, he used to say that he wouldn't tell you what to think, he'd tell you how to think. And so I mean, hopefully that's where you should end up. And I think, I mean, some of it is not even the whole sort of cult following, or I don't know if you could call it a cult following when he's that popular, Jordan Peterson. Then he's more than a cult, right? It's a million, millions of people are following him. And I think some of it, some of the craziness that goes on there, I think some of it's just unavoidable. That when you reach a certain level of popularity, then, for example, people will ask you for your opinion on things that you don't really know that much about, right? So he's also sometimes talking about food and diet, and it's not that I don't get the feeling that he's some sort of that he wants to be like a diet guru or anything like that, but it's just that people keep asking. And so he answers and he airs some of his theories about diet, and so that starts so people start noticing that and start criticizing that. And I think and so that starts off like a whole sort of fight about that. And he's not I don't know if he's interested in that, but that's a sort of a mechanism that just happens when you have that many people following you, and obviously you attract some weird people too. Is that his fault? I don't necessarily think so. I mean, you're going to attract some weirdos when you have millions of followers. And I think and then he also, I think I think we spoke about this earlier, that when you attract a lot of criticism, we talked about the fact that he sort of seems to have changed from, I watched some of his early videos from like 16, 17, before he became very famous, like before his book came out. And when he's teaching his class, and he seems kind of casual and loose and jokey and just like having fun teaching his class. And I mean, obviously, he's been very ill, so that's another reason why he's not, perhaps having that much fun right now. And horrible things have happened to him, so of course there's that. But I think there's also just the fact that you're that famous, you get a lot of criticism, and you have to sort of perhaps you go into sort of like a warrior mode, where there's so many people attacking you, then you get used to being on your guard all the time. You know, maybe it's a bit like being a politician. I don't know, that you have to, you can't really approach people in a normal fashion like we're talking right now. You know, we're both sort of friendly, we're both friendly towards each other. And I mean, I think there's like a mechanism that happens there, that when you reach a certain level of popularity, you get a lot of criticism aimed at you, and then you become more sort of that you become more of a fighter, or you get harder, something like that, because you sort of have to, perhaps psychologically, I don't know, or it's a something that just comes from being in a sort of like a constant debate with everyone. Yeah, and I mean, personally, I'm not likely to get that famous, but I see that in I mean, I've been in like a few debates online, and just from that, I see how you can become more sort of more aggressive than you want to be, because it's like a mechanism that happens.
Yeah. Well, I think you can
So,
respond
yeah.
different way. We respond in different ways to being under attack, right? And so the basic nervous system, you talk about fight, flight, and freeze.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think Jordan Peterson, you know, he at least espouses a approach of masculine strength and resilience and standing firm. And so I think he naturally does go to the fight response. And increasingly, he's also, I think after the last New York Times interview they did with him, then he said like, well, he's just not going to be doing interviews with mainstream media anymore as well, which you can say, well, that's also a bit of a flight, right? And unfortunately means he's retreating to a bubble more, because now he's only talking with people that, you know, you can have comfortable conversations with. But I also understand it, because, you know, he's gone from being a professor in a university, quite unknown, to being massively famous, and I would say incredibly hated. Like, I think he's been the object of incredibly powerful, like very, very violent hate and aggression, and people who, you know, would, you know, like want to destroy him basically. And I don't think that, I think that influences people very, very much. I don't think that's something that one can just brush off in any way. So I think he's shot to fame very fast, and he's handled it well, I think, not least because he has a wife that is very, you know, strongly behind him. And I think, you know, I think if he had lost his wife, we would have seen something even worse happening. But yeah,
but I mean, I think what
he obviously has struggled to handle that kind of sudden rise to fame.
Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking about what that sort of generally the shift in debating generally, because as I said, in the early 10s, when I was watching these Hitchens, Sam Harris, etc. videos, of course they were videos that were sort of edited together, where you had like 15 Hitch slaps, or Sam Harris obliterates this and that. But they were taken from very long debates, and so you have Hitchens debating like a Catholic priest, or Sam Harris debating, you know, 10 rabbis or whatever. So like, and they were like these Oxford style debates sometimes, where you have like a proposition: is religion a force for good or not? And they would debate back and forth. And I think now what I'm seeing more and more is, like you said, Jordan Peterson talks to people that he more or less agrees with. You know, and that could perhaps be because the people that he disagrees with, well, you know, they don't want to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk to them. And in a way, I guess I sort of miss the old debates, where you actually had people that disagreed with each other. And of course, you know, they were disagreeing on other topics, but they were actually, you know, they actually were interested in meeting and debating each other. And it wasn't that, you know, we weren't under any illusion that Hitchens was going to change the mind of a Catholic priest or vice versa. But of course, they were doing it for the audience, so you could hear the best version of each argument. You know, that's like the debating ideal, right? And I just don't see so much of that happening today. I mean, I saw one debate that was like a sort of classic Oxford style debate with Jordan Peterson, and I think it was it Stephen Fry on one side, and then it was Michael Eric Dyson and another person that I don't remember the name of. And that sort of got very heated. I think Michael Eric Dyson called Jordan Peterson a mean old white man or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was like the closest I've seen, because I think, I mean, today I see more like these sort of Joe Rogan, the conversations that we're having right now, like long conversations with people that you know, you're not, the idea is not to get into like a heated debate, because we don't really have a moderator. We're not defending any proposition. And in a way, I sort of missed that. I mean, I heard a talk between, sometimes I listen to something called the Glenn Loury show. Glenn Loury's like a economist, professor of economy at Brown, and he talks to a linguistic professor called John McWhorter, and they talk about race in the U.S. And so they're sort of against this whole Black Lives Matter, anti-racist discourse, and they talk about, you know, would it be realistic if they were that they should have a debate with someone who represented the Black Lives Matter viewpoint, the Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, those people, you know, would it be realistic? And when I heard that, I thought, well, of course not. You know, that's never going to happen. And I don't know if that's because they don't want to meet the anti-racist people, or the other way. You know, it's probably a bit of both. But I also just think it's because that they don't have to. It's unpleasant. It's perhaps both sides aren't sure that they're gonna, you know, that something meaningful will come of it. But I think in a way it's a shame. I mean, I'd love to hear a debate between a sort of an anti-racist, quote unquote, woke person and someone who is against that. I mean, an actual like a 2-hour-long debate with a moderator, and you know, I'd really like that, but I don't see it happening.
Well, it's interesting because I mean, I think I almost have the opposite perspective. Well, I don't know. What my question would be, how would one, you know, if this isn't, how do you ensure that that's productive? Because I don't know, for me, so as I mentioned in the beginning, I don't have a television. I don't pretty much follow 80 News. Now I've been reading a bit in Weekend Avisen, and I've appreciated some of it. But my biggest criticism is that there's this constant focus on kind of like this back and forth of you know, polarized debate, which is causing people to pull further and further back from each other and kind of shooting at each other, which prevents any new knowledge from actually arising or coming out of it. And so how does one have those vigorous debates and so ensure that, well, it's actually leading somewhere, we're not just kind of, you know, reducing what can actually be said in public, because what it does for me is it narrows things down or gets people like aggressive and out of their seats kind of thing. So yeah, what's your...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly why it's not happening anymore, because or there's not more of it than is the case, because yeah, it gets turned into like little bite-sized little, you know, clips, and then Jordan Peterson fans can watch him obliterate people, and Hitchens fans can watch him obliterate, and vice versa, you know. But I mean, I think the point of, for example, the Oxford style debate that I was talking about, I mean, the point there to me is not that anyone should change, you know, that the debaters should change each other's minds or sort of exchange knowledge and perhaps learn something themselves. I mean, I think the point is that the audience should hear the best versions of various arguments, and because they're supposed to sort of answer each other's arguments, then they're actually forced to think about what the other, you know, person is saying, because you need to have like a, you know, coherent argument. You have an audience that you have to persuade. You don't have to persuade the other guy, because obviously he's never going to listen, right? But you have to persuade the audience. And so, you know, sometimes you can get that in social media debates. I've seen, you know, I've been on Facebook a lot, and I've seen, you know, a lot of debates where you actually, it's not, you know, and they often get criticized too for being very aggressive and polarizing, and I think that's true as well. But if people do it right, so to speak, then you get the best version of each side.
It can work well. Yeah. So I mean, as you know, I organize events for men where we go off sometimes up to 140 guys together and do stuff together. And we often get asked, like, why only men? What's the point of that? And a large part of the reason is because we've simply experienced when we do that, when we're only guys together, then we actually can have those vigorous, direct debates and keep, moving forward in a positive direction. And so when we get asked like, well, what's the reason for that? Then, the answer that normally comes out, and I started giving it myself as well, it's because of like sexual competition. So when we have mixed gender rooms, then guys are just far more competitive with each other because, even when they're married or something like that, maybe it's a subconscious thing, who knows? But it seems like that, there's another kind of teleos that's come into our conversations where it's about winning the argument instead of actually and so yeah, I don't know.
Let
Do
me get it
you
straight.
recognize this? Does that make sense to you?
I just need to understand what you're saying. So if you're in a mixed group with women, then guys will so if you're only guys, then yeah. But if you're only guys, then you'll actually be interested in the argument itself. You're not interested in showing off. Yeah.
That's our experience.
Yeah.
And just be able to appreciate each other far more and see each other far more for what each other different guy brings. And for many men, it's a like totally new experience of like guys. We'll always say, if we gather 150 guys, then there'll be like at least 5 or 6 who'll say like, I've never been together just with men for a whole weekend before. Anytime there's just men around me, I feel nervous and uncomfortable. And then they'll start like kind of realizing like, oh wow, okay, no one's out to get me here, no one's out to like kind of dominate me, and actually I can just be here. And the more that I show myself, the more that we can actually just create a positive fellowship together somehow. Yeah,
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I have a colleague, a male colleague, who used to sort of he's a member of a Facebook group where it's only men, and they talk about food. And he says then in that group, it's all about competition. It's all about just very, very aggressive. And if someone writes something sort of very, very innocent, like, oh, well, I'd use, onions for that. No, you shouldn't use onions, you mother, that's completely the wrong thing to do. And they're exactly, as you say, dominating each other. And then he's a member of another group where it's only women, they talk about hair. And that's all about consensus and your hair looks great, blah blah blah, so so my prejudice against all male groups would be exactly that they're sort of very aggressive and competitive. But I guess once you get beyond that, it becomes something else.
Well, it's not, for me, it's about integrating it. So, we there's a place for aggression and there's a place for competition. Just as like in a sports team, the individual members will push each other and, use humor and but also compete with each other to bring the best out of every single man as well. Right. But it does seem, and this is the reason why I think, why Jordan Peterson has grown, but also like why I think, we're seeing like we call the men's movement is growing so much is because it seems to be more and more a lost art. Like people just don't know how to have productive male friendships a lot of the time. Men, those are the guys that I compete with, and women, those are the ones who I can talk about my feelings with. But I that kind of black and white thing. And we kind of see it in a different way, or we've at least experienced that it can be more productive by finding a balance in relationships with men and women. Yeah.
I don't know what a whole weekend with women. I mean, I don't think it will be that different. I mean, it doesn't get. I mean, this is perhaps also a very generalizing thing to say, but when I'm with other women, it doesn't take us that long to sort of get to talking about feelings. So it's not.
It's different than if you have a mixed gender group when you just have women, right? And
I guess. I mean. But not necessarily. I mean, that depends what. I think you can sit in a mixed group, and if there's perhaps like a slight overweight of women, and this is very generalizing because of course we can also talk about non-emotional stuff. I get that. That's not what I'm saying. But if you want to talk about personal stuff, for example, then you can. I mean, I suppose you can. If there's a slight overweight of women, then you can sort of tip it over in that direction. But it doesn't, get like it doesn't go like 100% in that direction, but you can. I mean, I think as a woman, you can sometimes in some like in some groups you can create a bit of, I don't know, because I get the feeling that, yeah, when you're in a mixed group, then men often won't talk about personal stuff. They won't talk that much about feelings. It takes a lot for them to get there, and I don't really mind that. I don't, like, after 5 minutes I don't mind asking someone, how's it going with your wife, or what about this, what about that, and how's your relationship going. And I just think that's, it's not that private and personal for me, and so you can sort of like, you can provoke someone or get a conversation going, and some men are sort of, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, we can talk about that. Where, I don't know if they're perhaps used to there being like a long you have to talk for hours before you get into that, or it just seems that guys, of course they want to talk about that. They just need someone to start that conversation. So
yeah.
But I don't know, I
Yeah.
mean, how it is, like, from your viewpoint, like, if a woman wanted to talk to you about emotional stuff, if it would be different from if a guy did it. I mean, if you would react differently, if there'd still be like a bit of peacocking or whatever.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, could you sort of could you look away if could you ignore the fact that you were talking to a woman and not a guy? I mean, would you always be thinking, how does she see me? Do I come off as weak, or blah blah blah?
Yeah. Well, I think since I've been married, like, I mainly only do that with my wife, because there's an intimacy in kind of that kind of stuff, which I think opens up a space of meeting where it feels most appropriate to do it with my partner, actually.
Yeah.
And I think for me, then, having guys that I can do that with, when I feel unsure about something, when I feel unsafe, or like, doubting, or like my foundation is kind of moving a bit, then if I go to my wife with that, then that's going to make her feel unsafe as well. But if I go and talk to my male friends about it, and we kind of work through it, and my male friends react in a very different way. They'll challenge me, and they'll try and fix my problem. If I go to female friends or something like that, or to my wife, then they like to go around, and like, I get a lot of sympathy. But it also makes her feel unsafe if it's my wife, right? And the guys don't want to fix it for me, right? So they challenge me, and so then I feel like, well, what, why haven't you done anything about that? And so then I get put on the spot a bit more. So it's more challenging. But then when I then can go to my wife, then I have more clarity as well, right? And so for me, that's a massive value, to have male friends that I do this with, and I think she benefits from it a lot as well, because then I get to become I know where I'm going, and I'm clear. But certainly I think women have a greater need for and capacity for kind of staying that emotional space. And I think that's great for going around and around. And I think they, I mean, if you see human beings, as a Jordan Peterson thing, but you see human beings as like a tribal being, right? Then the guys, they had to be very goal orientated. We need to move the tribe from here to here. We need to go and kill those animals, or attack the other tribe and kill them. So we need to do them in the most efficient way possible. Whereas the women, they were the ones who were making the social fabric of the tribe work, and so they were the ones who created the unity and the togetherness and that kind of thing as well, right? So I think that's why women are so good at talking to each other.
What? I'm sorry?
Well, women are just so much better at talking to each other than what guys are, right? Guys,
I mean, but I can't help
training at it apparently.
But I mean, I don't know if I guess so, but I mean, I don't know how much of that is, I mean, well, that's a whole huge discussion about that, right? Like, what is biological and what is not
cultural.
That's a whole but perhaps we could talk about that in relation to Jordan Peterson, because I think that's interesting as well, because as one of the things that I've written about Jordan Peterson is that he has like different roles that he plays, right? That he's as you said before, he's like he's this man of science, and he talks statistics, and when I've heard his lectures, he talks about like statistics and like the various psychological models, things like that. And then there's like this psychologist, this therapist side of him that wants to help people individually and help these young men, and he gets emotional when he, you know, thinks about all the men that he's sort of pulled back from like the brink of suicide almost. And then there's like a political the culture warrior, right? And I think one of the things that, I mean, and I think it's one of the things that I don't think he's really grappled with entirely is the way that they sort of overlap. So to sort of phrase it in the question, I mean, could he be a good therapist for a woke person, I suppose, is my question. Because on one hand, he's trying to develop like a framework. I don't even know if that has anything to do with gender, but never mind. It's just something I've been thinking about with him. On one hand, he tries to like establish a framework that everyone can live on the basis of, and on the other hand, he's very provocative and political, and has very sort of fixed opinions on transgenderism, for example, your pronouns, that type of thing, and whether you agree with him or not, it's like a controversial topic, and he's going to have a lot of enemies. And it's as though he's,
I mean, absolutely, there's limitations to who he can connect with and who will find value from him. Just today, I listened to a big inspiration for me is a guy called Michael Hyatt. He's a business coach in the US, and I really appreciate the guy for, you know, a lot of stuff that he talks about. And then I saw he has this podcast on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And I was like, oh, those are like, you know, because I would have considered myself for a long time to be, you know, I've refused to take this anti-woke stance. I'm saying like, we're not going to define ourselves by being anti something else, which I think Jordan Peterson does to a certain extent, right? Definitely. Large part of his fame is from his stance against something. And when you do that, you're allowing someone you don't like to define who you are, which means that you tend to swing too much the other way. And so I listened to this podcast, and sure enough, I knew that I would be challenged, and I was challenged because there were some things that were said, which I thought, well, you're just like turning all Black people into victims, and, you know, And I found a whole lot of like explanations popping up into my head about why I disagreed with this person. But Michael Hyatt was just sitting there and listening to him and agreeing with everything he was saying, right? And so that was like really good for me to realize, well, you know, like, because I think Michael Hyatt's a lot cleverer than I am. And so you know, you know, so yes, I have a standing place, and I'm formed by things that have hurt me, especially, or things that I feel have impacted my life negatively, and as has Jordan Peterson done, right? And so I think if I had to take one thing from Jordan Peterson, it's really just like, you know, don't neglect passed down wisdom, you know, the foundation of the society and the culture that you're standing on. Don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, but like contend with those things. But yeah, if one, you know, as we said, you know, you can't make Jordan Peterson isn't the savior of the world. He's the voice of one crying in the wilderness, I think, is the words that have been used sometimes. And I think that's a good way of saying it.
I just think that is very interesting that he I mean, to me, it seems as though he prefers his role as a therapist, that's where he finds the most meaning, to meet people that he's sort of impacted and listen to their stories. And, you know, he always gets emotional when he talks about that, right? And and it's as though that he sometimes is not directly saying, but indirectly is saying, you know, I just want to help people. You know, why is everyone being so negative? And then, you know, 2 seconds later, he's off saying, well, you know, that's just postmodern neo-Marxism, that's totalitarianism. And I'm not saying that, you know, he should do anything else, because that's obviously what he believes. So he's not, you know, shouldn't lie or anything. That's not what I'm saying. But I think somehow and I think perhaps that's where I mean, I'm not, you know, trying to be patronizing that he would benefit. I think you'd benefit from this. But perhaps, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing a debate between him and some sensible woke person, to just hear how he'd react to that, because I think that would be really interesting. I mean, so they wouldn't be speaking from separate corners. And perhaps, you know, it's just because no one is interested in talking to Jordan Peterson because they think he's a lost cause, and he doesn't want to get into that either because he doesn't want the negativity. And I think that's that's a shame, because I think, I mean, for example, I followed someone on called ContraPoints, someone called Natalie Wynn ContraPoints, who's very popular on like the sort of the leftist YouTube, and so she's done a video on Jordan Peterson where she discusses this whole, you know, his this term that he uses, the postmodern neo-Marxism, and criticizes that, you know, how can Marxism be postmodern? Isn't postmodernism about destroying all the big ideas? So how can it be both, and etc. And I thought that was very interesting. And she's, you know, exactly and she's the type of person that I think Peterson would be. It would be interesting to hear a debate between those two. I don't know if they'd want to, or if that would be too much negativity for both of them.
But I think Jordan Peterson is just not in a position right now to debate whatsoever.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it could have happened, you know, 2 years earlier or 3 years earlier, but it's as though
you don't think that he's had those debates, though? I think he's debated plenty of intelligent, sharp, left-orientated people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm looking for is not so much, I mean, because he's been in a studio often where, you know, people have but that's just, you know, I mean, that's sort of happens very quickly, right? He gets 5 minutes, someone else gets 5 minutes. I think I'm sort of looking for like a longer debate, but with a moderator, something like that. Because that's what I thought was good about the Hitchens-Dawkins, Hitchens-Dawkins things. Yeah, because I mean, it's sort of such a cliche to say, but they are really, you know, speaking to sort of echo chambers, and you know, so of course, you know, it's your own responsibility to go outside of that, and you know, I can always listen to ContraPoints or whatever to get another viewpoint, but I think it's a sort of perhaps a sad development that you're either the debate is polarized, or you're afraid of polarizing even more than that you can't meet someone who is
good. I think we're getting close to being finished.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Hello. Hello.
Hello, Marta.
Hey.
Yeah,
I
lost you for a second. We're back. Great. So maybe I was thinking, can we finish this off then and bring this all down to Denmark, which is your area of expertise. And you know, what do you see as, you know, if we say like, yeah, we're going further and farther apart, and when we do come, then we lose understanding with each other. Like, what does one do about that? And what do you see? What is that the case in Denmark, or am I just a skeptical cynic?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about polarization, but that's just when it comes to sort of YouTube debates. I don't know if that's representative for how people actually feel. I mean, I think I tend to sometimes look at online debates and see them as representative for how people are actually thinking in Denmark generally, and I think that's a mistake. I think online debates and also, you know, just generally news sources, they attract certain types of people, and also perhaps have sort of political leanings one way or the other, and they're perhaps not representative. So I wouldn't talk about polarization and you know, being all sort of doomsday-ish about it before I saw some actual evidence for that happening. And perhaps there is, you know, perhaps I just haven't seen it, but I wouldn't be so quick to say that you know, we're in Denmark certainly sort of drifting further and further apart. I don't necessarily see evidence for that. Yeah, but perhaps that's, I mean, I write for Weekend Avisen, which is, I mean, I have a whole week to do a story. We don't really do a lot of clickbait, so I'm not really affected that much by that, and I hope that doesn't, I mean, I hope I don't I hope I'm sort of able to look behind, to look sort of beyond online debates as representative of what people are thinking, because I don't, you know, necessarily think they are. Yeah.
So what maybe, what's Weekend Avisen's secret, and you know, what
they've hired me. No,
Yeah,
well,
obviously.
I've yeah, well, what's a secret? Well, I guess just the fact that we have, obviously very intelligent people on our staff, and we have a long time. We have, a whole week, as I said, to write our stories, and it's something that, as long as I think the internet has been a player in the media business, I think everyone has been talking about, we need an antidote to that. I've heard so many
Mhm.
sort of business, like what do they call pitches? Like if you pitch, what should this new media site be doing? Well, they should be doing in-depth articles. They should be doing the stuff that is, the anti-clickbait stuff. And that's been a discussion for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And I think that's basically what Weekend Avisen has always been doing. And so I think we were in a good position
Yeah.
when the internet started taking over started taking over news. I just think we were already in a good position.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
thank you for doing that. And yeah, certainly for me, it's been a welcome kind of island, or at least sight of land in an ocean of clickbait chaos. And maybe it was just me that got a little lost on because I've basically totally withdrawn from also social media. I still use YouTube because I use it for my work, but like Facebook, and I've never been on Instagram or anything like that. And so, and then, the little bit I've had from newspapers, it's been working with a group of guys, like, is this really productive? But I think that this has been something that's helped me to see, well, I can change my perspective. And I think also, the world is your mirror kind of thing, right? And so it's good to kind of seek out the things, at least that's what I've been realizing, seeking out the things of seeing the things that I'd like to see more, and putting my attention on that, then they have a tendency to grow as well. So yeah.
Well, I think you should send this last bit where you say that that you started buying vegan. You should send it to my boss, and I
And
will
by the way,
use
you
it.
should be paying her a little bit of a higher.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and you tell him that you have a large following. They'll do whatever you tell them to. So yeah, so we'll see like a big sort of spike in subscriptions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I wish that I had that influence already. Unfortunately, we've been kind of hiding from the media and staying under the radar deliberately, because that's where we feel we can have the most productive conversations. But who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the future? But we've really thought, like, by staying really local and grassroots, that's where we can be making sure that we're creating value, not up in the kind of warfare area of public debate.
Yeah, I mean, that is a risk if you go. I mean, as soon as you become any type of public or famous or semi-famous or just well-known, then there is a risk that you will be.
So we've never done any marketing before, and maybe so this is just an interesting point. But you've never done any marketing together, and then 3 weeks ago, I made a little advert and I put it out on Facebook. First time we've ever done anything like that. We've just been word of mouth before that. And immediately we have people like writing like incredibly aggressive, hateful stuff, like, oh yeah, really, really harsh things. And it's like, wow, okay, like, is this what you do? You sit on Facebook and you like attack people on fairly baseless grounds. Was really fascinating. And people saying like, oh, you're a cult, and then, oh, like, you're a low T soy boy things, or, oh, you guys are just woman haters, everything, like, from the entire spectrum, totally in random directions, right? Fascinating that happens. But
I mean, I don't know what to do.
I do feel Facebook, for me, that's like it's a wasteland by now. That I've decided, like, Mark Zuckerberg, I do not trust. Well, I think he's just lost control of his monster, basically. That's what I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think Facebook has become, I mean, I feel like such a boomer when I use it, because I have my boyfriend's daughter she's 18 and she doesn't, use Facebook at all. And so I feel so old when I use it. I feel so, ancient, 'cause she's on, I don't know, TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
So I just feel extremely old. But I mean, I don't know what to, because I totally recognize as soon as you put something out there, you run the risk of becoming associated with all sorts of terrible things. And it just makes, I think it makes you very sort of cautious, but it's hard to know, what to do about it, because, you're going to stop people from speaking their minds or whatever. I mean, So yeah, I guess that's
Well, choosing our platforms and strategically understanding like how Medium works. I don't know if you follow Marshall McLuhan, but he's been like a big guy coming onto my radar. Realizing, like Jordan Peterson, he's a person who lives in Toronto, but he's become like this big person, how like digital media expand your nervous system. And so, now he's really expanded. Like that's Jordan Peterson. And seeing it that way, suddenly like, our understanding of what's happening takes on another dimension. I think that helps at least navigating the currents.
And you have to be quite, I think perhaps sometimes, I sometimes perhaps also underestimate that. Most people don't think that what they're writing or what they're saying is going to become global. There was a story here there is a story here in Denmark. I don't know if you heard about that. There was a 15-year-old boy who's on because the prime minister was doing like a photo op with a school, and she took a picture where she was sitting in front of a school, and one of the boys, as the picture was being taken, he did like I'm gonna show, like he did like this, right? It's like a fuck you to the prime minister, something like that. And it's become this huge story where the boy's father is saying, well, he didn't know that she was going to use it on her social media, and so it's become like a huge, and so it's spread, and probably he wasn't thinking that would happen at all. And so it's very weird for people to have to think. When I'm sitting here saying the stuff that I'm saying, I'm constantly thinking you should only say things that you can defend in front of a large audience. You should only say stuff that can bear to be repeated on like a front page, and that's a very weird way of thinking. That's not a way that normal people think on a day-to-day basis, but we'll probably have to.
Well, the internet does not forget, at least. So Marta, we have a lot of things we could talk about, I'm sure. Thank you very much though for this conversation. It's been really valuable and interesting. You are we can find you on Weekend Avisen, I assume, and you're also going off to write a book. Maybe you start telling us what your project's going to be about that, and where people can follow you.
It's about motherhood. It's like a journalistic, hopefully also funny guide to the role as being a mother, which I became a year and a half ago. So I'm doing that in April. Hopefully it'll be interesting.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.